I really look forward to sharing a bit today about feedback and some of the things that I've learned in relation to feedback. My reflection has been about how scary it can be sometimes, honestly, to receive feedback, and how vulnerable I have often felt in the past when I have been asked to gather feedback from others, especially in the workplace. I've also been reflecting on the courage it takes to receive feedback willingly, but importantly, to take the time to process the feedback and to act on it, right? I've also reflected recently on some of the experiences that I've had where feedback can be weaponized, right? Where the advice to get feedback or the systems for gathering feedback have been weaponized to either limit careers or to try and propagate certain narratives. So there are positives and negatives, to this. But personally, the decision I've made on a personal level is to always seek and pursue feedback, to be willing to hear feedback, and to use my judgment on what feedback to take and what feedback to reflect on, right? To sit on, until it makes sense. So rather than reject feedback outright, just the willingness and the trust in my own intuition that I'm able to judge what feedback is for my growth, and that ultimately in time I'll be able to make a determination on whether or not the feedback was malicious or not, rather than shut the door to feedback. I have been in situations in my career where I have felt that feedback was weaponized, where either, your team is asked for feedback indirectly about you, while there is nothing wrong and there should be no formula to feedback. How that had made me feel, especially if it hadn't been transparent, is it made me put up my guard, and question the motives, and therefore shut down the potential and the possibility of receiving feedback. While the means for gathering feedback may have been inappropriate from my standpoint, while I may not have understood or the intention behind the approaches adopted, my regret is not being able to open up to the feedback rather than focus on the mechanisms that or the systems that were in place, that were put in place, and questioning them. My reflection has been, how might I not throw away the baby with the bathwater? In other words, how might I continue to seek and even welcome feedback, even when I disagree with the methods or the approaches, that way, put in place for it to be to be delivered. So that's been my reflection. I mean, I've reached a point where I'm really willing and ready to embrace feedback, no matter what form or shape it takes, because questioning the form and the method, for me, I've reached a conclusion that it's also an indicator of a degree of fear, that something might come up or out, as a result of that feedback. And if I am secure and willing to use feedback as an enabler, and trust that no matter the intention, there's something good that can come out of it, then it shifts the focus away from the method to the benefit of the feedback. So that's been my learning. The other learning, has been that, when you receive the feedback, take time to sit on it, to listen, and avoid the temptation. I know it's not easy to be defensive, to try and make sense of who might have said what, as uncomfortable as it might be. Sit in the discomfort. And I've also learned to find ways of regulating my nervous system, especially when the feedback is either harsh or feels unfair, or where I feel like I don't agree with what is being said. Now, the options are: you can either reject the feedback outright. You can be defensive about it and not take note of it, or as I've learned over, through many mistakes, many times where I've rejected feedback outright, I've resisted it, I've complained about it, where I've come to a point where I'm saying, you know what, no matter the intention, I will firstly take the time to listen to the feedback, right? Show willingness to listen, and I go as far as taking notes and telling the person that I'm taking notes. And during the session, whether it's formal or not, I ask clarifying questions. So when someone says, this is how you showed up in that meeting, I'll say, give me an example. What happened? So that I get the value of the feedback that is given. And what I also do is make sure that I try and avoid over analyzing the feedback to try and pick up who said what. I know it's hard because, when you've received feedback, especially when it feels unfair, I have been tempted to now try and think about who might have said it, under what circumstances might they have said it, what might have been their motive, right? Could it be that person? Could it be that one? Or am I in good terms with these people? What is really at play? What I've learned, at least with myself, and I can't generalize, is that when I overanalyze feedback, it's often due to an area in my leadership journey, or where I am from a life perspective, where I don't feel, where there's an element of insecurity, right? Because if I trust my capacity to analyze to absorb the feedback and to work on it, and if I trust my judgment and intuition to know what I can develop and what maybe is not an area that, if I trust my judgment that area, even though it's been said, I disagree what has been said, then I've got nothing to be afraid of, right? In fact, I can use that feedback as a potential calibration point in future when I receive further feedback. So in other words, I don't need to take everything that is being said, right? I can trust my judgment. If I receive feedback, it's really not the end of the world. Even if it's, no matter how harsh, no matter how difficult, I can get over that. I am not the feedback that I receive. So in other words, my worth and the measure of my worth as a person is not linked to the feedback I receive. And therefore, even on the day that I receive the worst feedback, which is often very scary, because sometimes you measure your standing either as a professional or as a leader, or as a friend, or as a spouse, based on the feedback that you receive. If my starting position is that, I know my worth, the feedback does not define me, and where there's opportunity to change, I can change, and there's scope to be better, then there's no reason to be scared of feedback, right? And I think also what I've also learned is, the importance of regulating one's nervous system, both during the time when one is receiving the feedback, but importantly afterwards, because it can also be difficult afterwards, especially if you're more inclined to analyze, things. So unless you really take time to sit with the feedback, endure the discomfort, and trust the process that after the discomfort will pass, then you grow. What I have often tended to do is, soon after receiving the feedback, overanalyze, try and make a picture of where it might have come from, follow up prematurely, either defensively or to try and explore, to try and, basically being uncomfortable with the discomfort and trying to get rid of it by correcting the negativity that has been said. Now, that's a recipe for disaster, because firstly, you can end up saying the wrong things. You miss the opportunity to process. You miss the opportunity to make your own judgments about the feedback, right? And therefore you disempower yourself in the process. Now, it might feel corrective to react and counter that. Maybe, for a moment it may feel better, but in the long run, it's almost like I find that I miss out on the opportunity for growth, right? Because I've been so fixated on correcting, as this discomfort, especially in areas where I had not grown fully, where there's a degree of insecurity. Then that tendency to try and correct then creeps in. Also, I think there's also the potential to then overreact and either raise a grievance or escalate based on feedback, or even avoid feedback and paint it as being victimized or being targeted. Now, while there are times when that can happen, right, I think it's important to use discretion to assess how harmful can this feedback be, right? What are the implications of me, not being willing to receive the feedback on my growth? Always have yourself, as the standard, as not as a standard, but as consider, things long term. Don't think about the immediate situation. Think about in a month, in 6 months, in 12 months, in 2 years. What might this mean for me, instead of focusing on the moment, right, and the discomfort that comes with the feedback. And when you are unclear, rather than react, right, seek clarity, schedule a follow-up meeting. If it's your boss or a leader that you respect or you work with, even if it's someone that you don't trust or respect, rather than completely shut the door, schedule a follow-up session to say, what is the reason for this feedback? What will it be used for? What are the parameters, and all of that, and use your own judgment, but always consider your development and be willing to engage in feedback. Now, if there's an assumption or if there's a concern that the feedback might be weaponized, highlight that, and of course use your judgment to in terms of whether you want to participate or not. But rejecting the feedback outright could limit your own growth. Accepting the feedback partially without a commitment and a conviction to deal with it could actually be self-sabotage, because you might be missing opportunities to learn and grow. And even where you might feel like you're receiving feedback from people who are against you, or those who may have malicious intent, sitting on the discomfort ultimately brings maturity, because even from the most malicious contributor, you still have the power, which you must never underestimate, to make a judgment about which aspects of the feedback to take, which aspects of the feedback not to take. And you still have the opportunity beyond the discomfort for growth. Once the nervous system is regulated, once it's calm, once you're no longer defensive, your rational mind comes in, and then you can process. And that's the benefit of allowing yourself to sit on the feedback rather than react prematurely. Now, in giving feedback to others, there are a lot of things that I've learned over the past few years. Firstly, it's important for feedback to be balanced, right? Start ideally with something positive where you've seen the person show up differently in positive ways, and then bring in the areas of opportunity. I've also learned that it's beneficial to ask for the person's permission, whether they're willing to receive the feedback and whether it's the right time to receive the feedback for them. So are they in the correct mental zone to receive feedback at that point? And allow them the space to reflect after the feedback, right? To take the time to reflect on it, because then you are showing them that you trust their judgment. I've also learned that it's not really it's not okay to weaponize feedback, right? Even when you notice that someone that you work with or someone that you are exposed to has weaknesses, weaponizing feedback mechanisms available to you, to try and address the person's area of opportunity is not okay, especially using other people. Rather, consider a direct conversation or other forms. So I guess in summary, feedback, the intention of feedback should always be to help the other person to develop. The intention of trying to gather feedback should never be to use that to weaponize, to either cause harm to the individual or to impact their career growth in the organization, or to try to gather evidence of their to try and gather evidence to beef up your case, so to speak, to try and prove a certain point which is not in favor of the individual that is receiving feedback. So it's really to make sure that it's always it's with positive intent, it's developmental, and even where it's negative, that it's packaged in a manner that is to enable the growth of the individual. And growth could mean that the individual is not the right person to be to be in a specific area or in a specific function. Growth could mean that you draw on their strengths and you position them in a different area. Growth could mean that they need some skills and guidance to regulate their system. They need counseling, whatever it is. But the intent as a leader should always be for the benefit of the recipient of the feedback, and not for selfish or punitive means. Thank you.